We're at a fundraiser for the senior class, and then we had basketball yesterday in Alma, and so we went to that, and then we had a color day dance to prepare for. Luckily, Jason was able to do that at his dad's house, and so I was able to get some time to put something together here, and it's been a pretty. Last night I learned a lot. I've talked about this subject a time or two with the kids, but I went a little further in it this time, and kind of it's taught me quite a little bit. So, anyways, we're going to be talking about becoming a person of integrity, and I work in service. I'm a service manager. And my job is to take care of people, and if I don't show integrity to the people that I take care of, they don't come back. That's how it goes. And so as I was going through this, like I said, this has taught me an awful lot, and things in my life that I need to work on and get better at, and so we're going to be taking a look at the life of Joseph. Joseph was an incredible man of integrity. We're going to start, though, in kind of our key verse here is in Ezekiel. And in Ezekiel, the Jerusalem was not a very good place. They're full of sin, full of just terrible people at that time. They were not very. It was just a very dark time for Jerusalem. And Ezekiel 22:30 says, "I looked for someone among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land, so I would not have to destroy it, but I found no one." And obviously, this is a prophetic word that was being spoken over Jerusalem, and so God is looking for a people of integrity, people that He can use to make a difference in a community, or to make a difference, period. So I want to start by asking three questions this morning. The first one is, what comes to mind when you hear the word integrity? It might be maybe it's a picture of somebody that you know. There's lots of things that can come to your mind when you think of the word integrity. The second question is, what are some things that challenge a person's integrity? And the third question is, what are some areas in which we can lack integrity? So I was looking for a good definition of integrity, and this is what I came up with. It says, integrity is a battle against compromise. It's forged over a lifetime, but can be tarnished in a moment. And it's a match between your words and your actions. And so integrity is huge. I said I've spoken with the kids across the street about integrity, and I've kind of stressed to them that their integrity in life is really what they have. Your integrity is what makes people believe you. It's what makes people want to be part of what you're doing, even. And so after I brought this definition, I want to ask them three questions again. What comes to mind when you hear the word integrity? What are some things that challenge a person's integrity? And what are some areas in which we can lack integrity? As I already said, Joseph was a man who had an abundance of integrity. So we're going to look at his life, and we're going to discover three tests and three commitments that Joseph made that people of integrity need to make themselves. All right? So we're going to be in Genesis 37. This is verses 5 through 28. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read most of it here. It says, Joseph had a dream, And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream and told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come to bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And then in verse 23 it says, "So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and, as they sat down to eat, and they threw him in a cistern that was empty, because there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming to Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices and balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. So Joseph's own brothers planned to kill him because they were just so jealous of him. And, I really feel like Joseph, as a young man, probably brought this on himself. I mean, I'm sure that he didn't just... I'm sure he just didn't walk up and say, "Hey, this was my dream, and this is what's going to happen." I'm like, "You're going to bow down to me." That's what I see. That's what I see. I mean, I feel like he brought the hatred upon him, that he brought the jealousy upon himself. And I know if Caden and Jason were sitting there and Colin came over to him and told him that, "I'm going to rule over you," Colin would probably be in for a pounding, because they would probably beat him up. I really think they would. And unfortunately, sometimes they forget that he's only 13 because he's bigger than they are almost, and so they're a little rough on him at times. So I believe that Joseph, after he'd been sold to the Ishmaelites, that he had plenty of time to think about what got him into the situation that he was in at that time when he was on his way to Egypt. We've all had adversity in our lives. And this was just kind of the beginning of Joseph's. I think about a couple things that have gone on just even in the recent weeks. Most of you don't know this, but I actually ran into Pastor Barry's car last weekend, and I had my kids with me, and I've been trying to teach them integrity their whole lives. And, I had a choice at that moment. Nobody was there but them. I could have just not said a word. They made sure that I wasn't going to get away with it. The first thing they did is they walked in the house. "Dad ran into Pastor Barry's car," and, they told on me pretty fast. And you guys, they were in prayer over here, so I didn't come in right away. I went to the house, and I think we had dinner, and then I came back to talk to Pastor Barry. But I had a choice at that point. I could have not said anything, and Caleb works at Walmart. Carts getting pushed into cars all the time, but I'm pretty sure a cart probably would not have done that damage that my pickup did to his car. And so I had to own up to it. I came here and I talked to Pastor Barry about it. He laughed at me, but I told him I would fix it, and I'm going to fix it. I found a door. I'm going to fix it. So we're but I really could have not said a thing, and then everybody would have questioned my integrity. It wasn't that long ago I told Donna back there I'd come over and help her move a desk or move something, put it in the back of her truck, and then I got home and the boys were talking about going shooting, and I got involved in that, and then this was on a Sunday, and so Monday I called her and apologized to her that I didn't make it to the house. I completely forgot, so I definitely have things in my life that I need to work on as well, as far, as keeping my word, but as far as adversity goes, I look back to about the last 2 years of my life and mine and Crystal's as a family, and with our boys, and we have had a lot of adversity at our home. We've had a lot of reasons. Yep, Dave too. We've had a lot of reasons to, that a lot of things that's tested our faith, and it's in times like that when we can go either way. We can go either way in our faith, and it depends on what we're standing on. Our convictions become clear when we're tested through adversity. It's in some cases it's really easy just to get mad at God. It's pretty easy to just to walk away and why would he let me go through this? Why would things like this happen in my life? And I'm sure Joseph probably felt the same way. He had dreams. He was supposed to be a ruler, I go on to think about all the things that Crystal's been through, and she's stayed so strong. And it's spoken to me, it's spoken to the boys, it's probably spoken to a lot of you guys. Just what she's been through and the attitude that she has kept through it all. Because it wasn't just cancer. She lost both of her parents. It's been a lot of adversity in the last couple of years for us. And there were times throughout this last couple of years that my faith was on the rocks. When my dad and my brother died when I was a kid, I made some bad choices, and I looked for comfort in my friends. I looked for comfort even in a bottle. I was underage, but I looked for my comfort there. And just to find that it's not there. It's not there. And it was pretty easy when we started going through all this stuff for those feelings to come back and for me to want to reach for that bottle and for me to want to just, not care about that. But, if there's one thing I've found out, though, is it's in those times right there when God is when God's closest to you. And if I had done any of that stuff that my spirit was, that my body was wanting me to do, there would have been other bad choices, and then my integrity would have been in question. And Crystal doesn't have any idea, because I kept on a pretty strong face, and I was the man for my family, and I stayed strong, and I stayed. But there's a lot of prayer, a lot of time on my knees in private, and just trying to hold on to what I had and all the victories that God had given me in my life thus far. And so, if there's one thing that I've found out, is that adversity can test our faith. It's in tough times that God can refine us to be more like Him. We sing a song called "Refiner's Fire." It's when He's shaping us. It's when He's building us into what He wants us to be. And so, through Joseph, when he was sold by his brothers, he had to figure out why. He had to spend a lot of time. I guarantee he had to spend a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time relying on God, trying to figure out why this was happening to him. The second test that Joseph went through is the test of prosperity. Wait a minute. Sorry, I hadn't even talked about the first test yet, have I? Yes, I have. I just did. Sorry. Got lost in my notes for a minute. All right. So the test of prosperity. So in this one, we're going to be in Genesis 39, verses 1 through 5. It says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field." So prosperity can test our integrity as well. It's easy to have faith when all is going well. Our lives are going well in our lives. When we're prosperous, we feel no need for God because everything's going well. You know, we don't feel like, it's in these times that we forget to pray, or we stop praying, because we feel like everything is comfortable. It's easy to start relying on ourselves more than we rely on God. We can fall into too much self-confidence, which can lead us to pushing God away. I don't know that I've ever been that prosperous. I got to tell you, I'm always, life has definitely thrown curveballs, but I just feel like I've been pretty happy. But I've always feel like I've always had to rely on God. I really have. Even when I was making my bag choices as a teenager, there was always I could only go so far. God wouldn't let me. There were certain things in my life that God would not let me do, and so even then I didn't know it, but I was relying on God, and so it's very easy though. It is very easy when we're comfortable to push things away. In the midst of our wealth, we are actually more needy. All the wealth in the world cannot buy happiness or integrity. I was thinking about this, and in some cases, the most wealthy people in the world are the unhappiest. They fill their lives with things. They fill their life. Michael Jordan's got this huge mansion, and I can't remember how much he paid for it, but it's been on the market for something like 15 years and hasn't sold. And, he's moved on to a different house, and this one's just sitting there empty, and nobody will buy it. And I'm sure that probably is frustrating for him that he can't get this house sold. You think, and I think of all the famous people that we've lost to overdose, or that we've lost to just suicide. They because they're unhappy. They can have everything they want, but they're still unhappy. Someday I'd like to. Someday, you guys know I'm a car guy. I like cars. That's what I do in my day job. That's what I do. I do cars. And someday I'd like to have a 1965 Buick Riviera. It's just a beautiful car. If you've ever seen one, they're amazing. You turn the headlights on. It's got these buckets that open up like this, and it's like it's opening its eyes when you turn the lights on. It's just a cool car, and the lines of this thing it's a beautiful car. But right now I'm happy with what I have. I have a rusted out Monte Carlo. But it's a fun car to drive. It's noisy. Crystal hates it because it's noisy. She used to like it till I made it noisy. And but that's what I have, and I like it. I've had people offer me quite a bit of money for the car, and I haven't sold it yet. And so it's good to be just happy with what you have. When things are going well, we need to seek the Lord more to keep us down to earth, to keep us focused on Him, and to give glory to Him in our good fortune. You know, we can be the poorest people in the world, barely making by, but if we have God, that makes us rich. Makes us rich. Joseph also got tested in contentment. Genesis 39:6 says, "So he left in Joseph's care everything he had, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except for the food that he ate." Potiphar was living life pretty easy at this point. All he had to do was get up, eat, and be merry. Joseph was managing everything that he owned, and it was prosperous. Potiphar was reaping the benefits without a care. But Joseph, even though he was a slave, probably had every chance in the world to be pretty comfortable himself. I'm sure that he didn't live, in the sheep barn. I'm sure he had a pretty nice place to live. I'm sure he probably wore some pretty nice clothes. Joseph was probably living a pretty good life at that point too. Being comfortable in life is a test of our integrity. When we're comfortable, again, we can lose sight of God. It's a temptation to rely on ourselves again. It's a temptation to feel like what we're doing on our own is what's causing this. But Joseph knew that it was God. He knew that he knew God was with him. Because again, when all of our needs are met, it's easy for us to forget about God. It's so easy just to keep going with what we're doing, and when good things happen, not give God the glory of it. But it's very hard to stay, as humans, it's very hard for us to stay down to earth, and very hard to give God glory sometimes. All right. So Joseph, through his testing, he also made 4 commitments. So these are the 4 commitments of integrity. The first commitment that he made was purity. So we're going to go on from Genesis 39, verse 6. We're going to go on to verse 7 here. It says, Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused because he said, "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns has been entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her, even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, "Come to bed with me," but he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called to her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the story that Hebrew slave you brought has brought us, came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burnt with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, he found favor. All right. So Genesis 39:9, Genesis 39:9, Joseph made a commitment to stay pure in spite of temptation. So Potiphar's wife was attracted to Joseph. Obviously, we read that, and Joseph could have had every temptation in the world to give up his integrity. But he knew that he'd been trusted with everything in Potiphar's house because Potiphar saw the integrity that he had. And if he were to sleep with his wife, that would not only have Potiphar questioning his integrity, but anybody that heard the story then would, his integrity would be tarnished at that point. Joseph did the right thing. He ran from temptation. He did everything he could to stay away from Potiphar's wife. But yet, that moment came when nobody else was around. Again, Potiphar made the right choice and he ran. We need God's help to remain pure. Joseph, being a man of faith, was able to stay pure. And he was able to run from the temptation. I just realized I have my notes that don't have my other notes put on them here, so sorry. Grabbed the wrong ones this morning when I came upstairs. That's okay. That's okay. We'll stumble through this. In today's world, we're met with so much stuff. Our poor kids, the temptation is at the end of their fingertips. They can right on their phones, and not only our kids, everybody. It's hard to stay pure in today's nasty world. But Joseph made a commitment. Joseph made a commitment to Potiphar that he was going to take care of his stuff. He made a commitment to Potiphar that he was going to that he would take care of everything, because everything was given to him, obviously except for Potiphar's wife. And Joseph knew that, if he'd crossed that line, not only was he dishonoring God, but he was dishonoring Potiphar. Unfortunately, that didn't help Joseph in the long run, because he still ended up in prison. So with that, going into Joseph being in prison, the next commitment that he made was his attitude. We're going to be going Genesis 39:19 through 23. I kind of went into this accidentally, but we're going to read it again here. It says, when his master heard the story that from his wife, "This is how your slave treated me," he burnt with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness, granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph, and he gave him success in whatever he did. So in Genesis 20 and 21, Joseph's commitment to have a good attitude in spite of his surroundings was tested as he was falsely imprisoned. So here Joseph goes again. He'd already been sold by his brothers into slavery. Now he's wrongly accused. He's sent to prison, and he had every reason to have a poor attitude. But his conscience was clear, and he knew that he had done nothing wrong. Joseph, I could imagine, was probably a really, I don't know how you could say a really good prisoner, but, I'm sure he made life in the prison for the other inmates pleasant. And through that, that's when he found favor with the prison master. And so the warden put him in charge of all the other prisoners, and anything that was done in the prison went through Joseph. Joseph still continued to have a good attitude. When we can't change our circumstances, we can still maintain a good attitude. Joseph worked hard in all that he did. He worked hard I'm sure he worked very hard to keep his eyes on God. I'm sure he worked very hard in when I imagine a prison from, it's okay. I imagine when, a prison back then is being, underground, dark, damp, musty, moldy, so stinky. And yet, Joseph held on to his relationship with God. He held on to this good attitude because, even though he was in this bad situation, he still had a pleasant relationship. He still had God. And sometimes, a lot of times in those situations, that's hard to do. It's hard to stay faithful. A bad attitude can sink our integrity by leading us to say and do things that compromise our integrity in the eyes of others. This is definitely something that that spoke to me big time as I was going through and I was reading Scripture and because I know that if something's not going well at work, I get angry, which we do, and I feel like I handle the anger pretty well. I'm not a yeller. My guys, they would be shocked if they actually heard me raise my voice to them. I don't do it. I feel like I can ask them and I can correct them without having to yell. But it's the good attitude part that I have a hard time keeping. I struggle to keep my eyes up. I struggle to maybe sometimes to show God's presence in my life when I have this attitude problem and when things aren't going the way I want them to go. I'll walk in and or Crystal asks me, "How's your day going?" Okay. When the reality is I'm still breathing. I still have another day to worship God. I've still got another day to be with my family, to spend time with them, but it's just okay. It's just okay. And I pray about that because I can say it's just okay. I have a smile on my face, but there's a better response. There's a better response to that question. Things are fantastic. They're not always fantastic. When Pastor Barry asked me to preach today, I'm like, I stopped and like, I said, "Well, I have basketball this weekend." That was my response. I have basketball this weekend, and he says, "Well, I hate to ask Marshall. He's already put music together, and I can't get a hold of Jeremy." And I'm like, "Well," he says, "and Craig's out of town, and I'm going through the list too." No, and I'm like, "Well, okay." But I'm like, but if you start feeling better, because it says Craig says I should start feeling better in about 36 hours. He thinks I'm about done with this. And I'm like, well, if you start feeling better, you make sure you let me know, and because, I preach for 15 minutes. With the kids, we have an hour. I usually set about an hour aside because it's a school night. So I literally preach for 15 minutes and in front of teenagers. You guys make me nervous. You really do. You really do. I'm not going to say I had a bad attitude about it, because I was nervous. Instantly this feeling of nervousness and this anxiety, kind of crept over top of me, and I didn't have much time to think about it, because we were doing a fundraiser at the time, and so I was already in the middle of something, but I had to stop and pray about it, and I ended up here at the church at about 11 o'clock on Friday night, and kind of trying to figure out what to do, and I've got this book down there that gives me outlines, and I open it up. It's like, well, this is the one we're going to do, and it's kind of not really how it went. I did pray about it, I promise, but this has taught me a lot, though, and so my attitude might have wavered for a minute, about it, but then I thought, let's just do this. Let's see what God has, see what He can do, and hopefully I can teach people something, or if anything, I've learned. So hopefully I learned just through this quick situation that maybe I can have a better attitude next time things aren't going so great at work, or next time maybe things aren't going so well at home, or one of the teenagers has raised my blood pressure, and to keep an attitude. The third commitment that Joseph made was the commitment of faithfulness, and we're going to be in Genesis 40, verse 12 through 23. Now Joseph, while he was in prison, there was, and he'd been there for some time, there was two of the king's attendants that had offended the king, and he offended him, and he throws them in prison because they offended him. And so they'd been there for some time, and they had both had dreams at the same time. And Joseph kind of came in, and he found that they were saddened. These two men were saddened that day, and I think that Joseph, being a man of God and being a man of faith, could tell when the prisoners were down, and he would take time. I see him praying with them and speaking to them and teaching about God, and so he sees that they were sad that day, and he asks them in verse 8. He asked them, "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there's no one to interpret them." And so they tell Joseph the dreams. And in verse 12, it goes on to say, Joseph says, "This is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position." Now this is the cupbearer. "And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in the dungeon." So when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph says, "This is what it means. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away at your flesh." Now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position. Once again, he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, and just as Joseph said to him in his interpretation, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. All right, so Joseph showed faithfulness to the cupbearer and to the baker. He as he was tending to them, he noticed that they were having a bad day, and he did what he does. He tended to them. He made them. I'm sure he probably didn't make the baker feel much better. I can't imagine that'd make me not be sad anymore to learn that I was going to lose my head. But he interpreted their dreams, and that's what happened. Joseph's commitment to be faithful, in spite of no guarantee that it would be better, that it would better his circumstances, was tested. We're called to be faithful even when it hurts, or if we aren't going to aren't guaranteed a reward. Life in some instances is pretty unfair. It really is. Not everything is always sunshine and rainbows. And it's in those times when you have to commit to your faithfulness. You have to hold on to what God has for you. And that's what Joseph did. He served the prisoners. He did what he was there to do. He showed his faithfulness to them, which in turn was showing his faithfulness to Christ, or to God. God wants us to be bound by our words. He wants us to be people of integrity. God wants us to do what is right in all situations, not only if it's going to benefit us. Being a manager, and I'm a salaried manager, so I get paid the same, but I get a commission check, and so I'm in charge of, I make the estimates for the customers. And if my technicians are making hours, that means my commission check is going up. All right? If they're not making hours, not so much. My commission check does not go up. And being in that position, I can run reports and I can see what the profitability is. I can see all this stuff at the shop, and it's pretty easy. It would be pretty easy for me to, if this job takes an hour to price it out to a customer, well, this job's going to take 2 hours, to increase my profitability. And in my spirit, though, I would not feel right doing that. I can't do that. I kind of got to make sure my technicians are making money, but on the other hand, I got to make sure I'm selling work at a fair price. And and I'm speaking of this because, I have to be faithful to my customers. I have to make sure that I'm taking care of them. I have to make sure that my faithfulness and that my integrity is not in question, like I said before. So we're called to walk in faithfulness, even though there's no reward. May not be a reward, and that's what I'm getting at here. Is I could reward myself by skewing these hours, and I've heard of shops that do that, and I could never be part of anything like that. And when money is tight, we all are dealing with the inflation that we have going on right now, and maybe our checkbooks aren't as full as they once were because our bills have gone up, our fuel's gone up, everything in this world has gone up except our wages, and so when the circumstances are hard, we're still called to walk in faithfulness, and that's what Joseph did. Joseph faced every problem, and he stayed faithful. He faced every problem with his integrity. I'm sure he just didn't make a quick decision like this, and we're going to do this. I'm sure he went to God in prayer. I'm sure that, he must have had a good spirit of discernment to know what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. And he never wavered in his integrity, even when circumstances were making it hard for him. He stayed faithful. And the last commitment that Joseph made was the commitment of consistency. So we're going to be in Genesis 50. And it's going to be verses 19 and 21. Now, there's a lot of background here before we get to this point in Joseph's story. By this time, Joseph had interpreted a dream for Pharaoh, and he found favor in the eyes of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh put him in charge of the kingdom. So he went from, being in charge of a prison to being in charge of the entire Egyptian kingdom. And the dream that Pharaoh had was telling Pharaoh that there was a great famine coming. Food was going to be scarce, and the area around Egypt, they were going to be looking to Egypt for help. And so through Joseph's wisdom and his integrity, he set up storage for food, and so they would store so much of their food, they would use so much of their food, and they got this great abundance of food stored up. And so it came to the point where the other countries were hungry, and they were coming to Egypt. Well, in the midst of all this, Joseph's brothers show back up again, and they have no idea who Joseph is. It had been many years, and I'm sure being the leader of this country, that he was dressed pretty nicely, probably had some kind of a head dress. They didn't recognize him, and so. Where am I at? In verse 19, Genesis 50, verse 19, it says, "His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. 'We are your slaves,' they said. But Joseph said to them, 'Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children.' And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them." So, you remember Joseph's dream, right? His brothers were going to bow down to him. There it is. His brothers had sold him into slavery. He had every reason to be sour. He had every reason to not help him. He had every reason, but he had too much integrity, if there's such a thing. He had too much integrity. Joseph forgave his brothers instead. It talks about in there that when he first saw his brothers, that he actually had to leave, and he went behind he had to go behind the curtain, and he was weeping because of his brothers, and he thought, I feel like he thought that he would be angry if he ever saw him again, but when he saw him, it was overflowed. It was just overflowed with love for his brothers, and he had missed them, and I feel like, that, through his faithfulness, that God showed him, God gave him this love for people. He had saved many people's lives already through the rationing of the food, and now he had a chance to save his brothers. And I don't think that when they bowed down and told him that they were his slaves, that he was like he could have said, "I told you, look at you guys, you're bowing down to me. I told you my dreams were that what my dream said." That wasn't it. He says, "Get up." I don't think it was satisfying at all to Joseph for his brothers to kneel down before him. I think it was, he saw them, and his love for them was he was overflowed with his love for him. And he's like, get up, get off the floor. I'm not in the place of God. Get up. You don't need to bow down to me. Let's get you cleaned up. Let's find you a place to stay. Go get Dad. Bring him here. Joseph had the commitment of consistency, even though he was in that position where he could have said, "Ha!" No, he didn't want, because again, his integrity would have been questioned, and he said, "Get in here, get up here and give me a hug. I've missed you guys. I forgive you for everything you did to me." So Joseph's commitment of consistency, in spite of the conditions he had been forced to live in, was being tested at that time. We should strive for consistency every day. I make decision after decision after decision every day at work. And I mention work a lot. I think the kids get tired of it, but that's what I do. I work a lot. And so I mention it quite a little bit when I'm talking. I did a sermon on God's timing, and I lost them all because it was a lot of engine talk in that sermon, and I lost them all. But I talk a lot about work, and again, I need to stay consistent with what I do. Because we don't want to be questioned. We don't want anybody to see anything that's out of line in our life, and obviously we're human, and we're not always consistent in everything that we do. But Joseph was. We should be known for our consistency and our faithfulness. When people are talking about us, that's what we should be known for. And our lives should be marked by consistency our lives have to be marked by consistency in order for us to be a people of integrity. That's what's going to change our community. Pastor Barry's talked a lot about this church being getting out into the community, and at one time this church was not in a position to go do that, but we are. We are now, and I love this church. I've been here a long time, and I would love to see, there's no room in the middle here, no room on either side, because people want to be here and people want to spend time with us, and people, I want us all to become a people of integrity. To end this, and I guess I can have the worship team come up. It was longer than 15 minutes. It's 11:20. I somehow figured out how to ramble on for quite some time here. But I want to end with a prayer in Psalm 15. It's Psalm 15, and this is this talks about God not being shaken. Verse 1 says, "Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary? Who may live on your holy hill? He whose walk is blameless, and who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from his heart, and has no slander on his tongue, who does his neighbor no wrong, and casts no slur on his fellow man, who despises a vile man, who honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps his oath, even when it hurts, who lends his money without usury, and who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things will never be shaken." That's a prayer of integrity right there. May you guys not be shaken. And I pray that I'm not shaken. I've learned so much in the last 30 hours. I can't even say it was a full 30 hours. There was breaks, but I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about integrity. I learned a lot about what God has called us as a people to be. Let's pray. Father God, Lord, I thank you for your word. Even though, Lord, that the short time that I had to put this together was shaky, and it was full of nervousness. It was full of anxiety, Father. But Lord, I've learned so much, and I pray that we've all learned something about integrity through the life of Joseph. Father, I pray for the people that are here, Father, that they can stop and reflect on their own lives, and as I have, and maybe see areas that might be in question, or maybe it's even just a maybe it's even just a I think I do that pretty well. And Lord, I pray that, Lord, that we leave here changed today. I pray that you'll be here through our time of worship. Father, thank you so much. Thank you for this last 30 hours and for the testing that it's been in my life, and for the patience of my family when I was trying to get it done. And Lord, I love you. And I know we all love you here. Thank you so much, Lord. In your mighty name we pray. Amen. All right, we're going to go into worship, and I'll move this. The altars are